think we are ready to start. So thank you everyone for being here today. I think we will having other participants joining in the meantime. I would like to welcome our speakers of today, Heather Britton, John Hawkes, and William Lovegrove. My name is Alessandra Vernile. I am project officer at UKSA, and I will be moderating this session. In the call, we also have Annalisa Donati, UKSA Secretary General, which you should be able to see us, hopefully. For your information, the webinar is recorded, and soon after the webinar, you will be seeing on our social media and our website an article, let's say, summarizing all the main takeaways of this webinar, as well as the recording. Just before we start, a very quick introduction on UKSA. UKSA is an association of space agencies, a non-for-profit association. We are mandated by our members to create networks to bridge space and society, and we touch upon different topics. So we have, for instance, we have maritime, we have education, we have cities, and much more. We have environment, climate, and much more. We count a big number of members, more than 20 members, 21 members all across Europe. And UKSA is one of our members, and this is a corner. So the members' corner is a moment for our members to talk and present their activities and their main, let's say, activities ongoing and strategies and output. And we hope, that this is for you, and I'm sure actually this will be very insightful. You will have the chat to ask us any question and to, in this way, interact with the speakers. I would like to immediately leave the floor to Heather. Heather will provide us initially with an overview on the UKSA. And so, Heather, please, you have the floor. You can share the screen, and if you have any issues, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you. I'll just share my screen now. So give me 2 seconds. Can you all see that?
Not yet, but is almost ready. Yes, it's charging the page. So we're almost there. Yes, we can.
I think all this will.
Thanks. Thanks.
No worries. Right, good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Britton, and I head up the Space Applications and Data team in the UK Space Agency. I hope everyone's looking forward to the weekend, but hopefully this will be a nice introduction to some of our work and yeah, be informative for you. I'm going to speak a little about the work of my team, the UK's priorities when it comes to investment, in particular into space applications, as that's my area of expertise. And then I'm going to hand over to some colleagues in the local growth team and our special guest from Space Health Central, which is one of the UK's space clusters. So that's the plan for the session. The UK's ambition in space is set out in the National Space Strategy, which was published in September 2021. The strategy describes the UK's vision to be one of the most innovative and attractive space economies in the world. So it's a really ambitious goal and something we're quite passionate about working towards. The strategy sets out what the UK will achieve in space by 2030, both with European partners, the really obvious one being ESA, and with an increasing number of bilateral relationships with other countries. So we look at relationships with the likes of Australia and Japan and Canada as well, to really build that space network worldwide and deliver exciting missions and capabilities and programs together. We really recognise that collaboration and partnership will be extremely important to make the most out of space, especially given individual countries have quite limited space budgets. So that is why we put quite such a focus on collaboration and partnerships, as I said, both with ESA and with other countries. The diagram on the right on this slide sets out the 5 goals in the UK's space strategy, and below them you've got the 4 pillars. So it's quite confusing terminology, but essentially I won't go through each of them, but they set out how the UK looks to deliver that overall mission of becoming one of the most innovative and attractive space economies in the world. This week, serendipitously, and it's a fantastic time for me to be giving this presentation. Another document was released on the National Space Strategy, and it's really a follow-up on the UK's activity in space, what we've been doing to deliver the different aspects of the strategy over the past couple of years since the space strategy was published in 2021. And it sets out some new things as well. So it says we're going to set out a space sector plan by the end of this year. And the idea of that plan is to describe what we see as the ideal space ecosystem in the UK looking like, really looking at the shape of the sector. You know, should we have loads of SMEs or should we aim to have more primes in the UK? Questions like that looking to be answered, which I think will be really interesting. And the document also covers capabilities. So it looks at setting out the capability goals for the UK, and so shows that we're going to think about roadmaps to deliver each of those goals. And the aim of that is to really better understand what we want from space. The National Space Strategy is great, and I used to work in the strategy team, so I am a little bit biased when I say that, but it is very broad. It suggests we're going to try and deliver everything and anything in space, really, which is great, but to a certain extent you have to prioritise and you have to be more specific about the capabilities you're looking to deliver. And so that's what the document that was published earlier this week indicates. And I'm happy for the link to that document to be shared around after this presentation. If I'd realised the timing was quite so good, I might have presented just on that, but I didn't know exactly when it would be published. So yeah, please give that a read if you get an opportunity. So the National Space Strategy, going back to the 2021 document, it sets out it's a joint civil and defence strategy for space. It's the first strategy of its kind in the UK, so a really important piece of work. And the UK Space Agency has taken the National Space Strategy and has defined how we as an agency think we will deliver the strategy via what we call our value proposition. But that's essentially the role that we see the agency having in delivering the National Space Strategy. And that says we are going to catalyse investment. So that means we're going to make sure that any public money we spend is invested in a way that multiplies the long-term value to the UK space economy. So we're really looking to grow our economy and grow our sector that way. And we're going to look to deliver missions and capabilities to really broaden our understanding of the universe. And we're going to champion space to support the public and other sectors as well to understand the benefits that space brings to them. Now, it's the catalysing investment aspect of that last slide that my team really focuses on when we talk about investing in space applications and data. And that's because we see the application sector as being really critical to bringing income into the UK space sector and growing the space sector overall. So the applications and data team sit in the investment directorate, and we look at using the outputs of space activity to connect global Britain, expand business potential and improve people's lives on Earth. A large chunk of my team's work is delivering the BAS programme, which I'm sure many people on this call are familiar with. That stands for Business Applications and Space Solutions. But we also have branches of the team working on international market access, which I'll speak a little bit more about later, and improving the access of UK space companies to growth capital, as we're really aware that although we have quite a good early stage investment landscape in the UK, like very early stage, taking research and funding, that we have a bit of a gap when it gets to later stage scale of funding. But I think that gap isn't something that's just present in the UK or just in the space sector either. It's present across deep tech sectors and across Europe as well. So I'm sure that's something that's felt by many of the people listening here today. Now, this just says a little more about space applications, and I'm sure I don't need to emphasise too strongly to this group why it's super important that we invest in them, but they support a huge breadth of sectors outside of space, and this slide lists some of those. And in the UK, the application sector is responsible for 75% of the UK space sector's income. So really, really critical. The challenge I often get from people when I describe that statistic is that that's mainly direct-to-home broadcast. And it's true that direct-to-home broadcast takes up a large proportion of that. But even if you take out the direct-home broadcast, direct-to-home broadcast stats, the space application sector still brings in the largest amount of income to the space sector of any of the other space sectors. Or segments within the space sector. So it's really important to us to invest in it, and I'm really pleased that my team is working on that. I found it massively interesting, and I love seeing the range of applications we get in for funding from all of these different sectors. I find it really, really fulfilling. Now, some of you might have seen this slide from ESA. I've shamelessly taken it, but just to set out a little more about what the BAS programme does. Now, the BAS programme looks at funding commercial exploitation of space assets, space data and capabilities. And it's a programme that many member states run in collaboration with ESA. And the idea behind it is essentially that we take any space data or application, anything that was developed for space really, or comes from space, and invest in those downstream applications on Earth. So it can include the use of space weather data or Earth observation data or satellite navigation data, and then fund activities across all of these different sectors. And just a couple of examples of ones that we funded in the past, you know, we've got autonomous vehicles. There's one that travels around the Harwell campus in the UK and that you can get on and it's driverless, which is really interesting and exciting. But you also see things like farming tools, so lots of Earth observation applications for farming. You also get sometimes renewable energy applications. So, for example, you can have technologies that use GNSS data to fix problems with offshore wind turbines, which is quite a big renewable energy sector in the UK. Things like that. So, really fascinating stuff. And this just sets out a little more some of the value that BAS adds to the sector. We invest in social economic things, industry competitiveness, and really look to grow the sector in this way. But I won't spend too long on this side. The last thing I wanted to talk about was about the other aspects of my team's work. So I mentioned BAS, but we also have our growth capital branch of our team, my team, and the international market access branches. And so when I say growth capital, I mean the work we do to support companies that are maybe past the point where we typically provide government funding. We like to support companies at that stage where they're just beginning to commercialise, but they haven't yet really grown to an extent where they're making enough revenue themselves to flourish, and then we will fund them potentially through BAS, but after that they might still need a little bit of support, but we look at helping them to contact investors, and they're exploring more ways to support them through that difficult stage in a company's life cycle. We can't keep funding them. We have a limited budget for of government money, but we look at ways in which we can work with investors, particularly non-space investors, actually, to try and get them introduced to space and get them investing in space more to generally benefit the space economy, and look at facilitating some of those relationships. We also have the International Market Access and Exports team, quite a lengthy name. Essentially what that team does and is looking at how we can take some of the successful companies coming out the back of our BAS investments and also other UK Space Agency programs, and we look to introduce their services to organisations abroad who might benefit from them. So we work very closely with our trade department, TBT, who supports us in going on trade missions and speaking to other countries about the excellent application services that the UK can offer. And then they will sometimes look to sell those services abroad and make introductions. And again, that's all about supporting organisations to commercialise. So as I said near the beginning, it's the catalysing investment aspect of the overall UK Space Agency's work that my team really focuses on. And everything we do is looking at how we can really expand, grow the space economy, bring high potential organisations to become more commercialised. And what we really are looking to do is grow the space economy in that way. And that is why when we communicate to people what our, high priority sectors are for BAS. We don't have high priority sectors in the same way. We'll invest across, at the moment, across agri-tech, across health, across maritime, all of the economies and sectors that exist in the UK. But we will look at those which catalyse the most investment. That's how we distinguish which companies we will fund versus those we don't fund. And actually, a part of our application process, which we've introduced to BAS, which other member states don't necessarily have, is a panel which is really just about assessing applicants' ability to become a really commercialised business and their ability to think in that really businessy and technical way, which sometimes you see space companies being quite academic and not being able to do. So we try and support that as much as we can. But that is the end of my section of the presentation. John, I'll pass over to you. And do you just want to tell me when to change slides and we can run it like that?
Yeah, that would be great. I was going to ask you to do the same thing. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me along today. I'm John Hawkes. I'm the Space Ecosystem Development Manager at the UK Space Agency. I sit in the same overall directorate as Heather, so we're focused on catalysing investment into the sector as well. But we take a different approach. Rather than looking at a type of technology, we're focused on building a whole UK ecosystem. And that means that we're looking to spread investment, capability, employment across the whole of the UK and build a really vibrant market that can sustain the breadth of capability that the UK needs in order to deliver the national space strategy, as well as being a powerful economic force. So you can see that's an infographic taken from the National Space Strategy. There are lots of things that feed into our overall growth ambitions, but this whole UK ecosystem is something that really underpins that. And there are a number of different things that our team does to create that ecosystem, which we can largely think is broken down into 4 distinct parts. The first, businesses, space companies based across the whole of the UK with a huge amount of capability. They need access to the right skills, they need access to markets, and they need to be able to collaborate and identify regional strengths in order to grow. So you've got businesses, you've also got a network of really innovative expert universities across the country. So there's an academic part. There's also access to infrastructure, whether that's testing facilities or ground stations. In order for a company to grow and for the sector to grow, they need access to these big pieces of infrastructure that one company on its own can't necessarily access. And then really importantly, you need to create an opportunity for these different parts to collaborate. And that's what my team focuses on. We manage, fund a network of space clusters across the whole of the UK, which are organisations that represent their local space sector, work with all the companies based there, identify local strengths so that they can facilitate partnerships and identify new market opportunities based on what the companies and universities and infrastructure in their area specialise in. So Heather, would you mind going on to the next slide, please?
Fine. 1, 2, 5.
Great. So this is the network of space clusters that we've got at the moment. There should be 17 of them in total, and the whole of the UK is represented by a space cluster. And their job can really be split into 2. The first, as I mentioned, is representing their local area, providing support to the companies and universities based there, identifying what their strengths are, what their potential weaknesses are. But their other job is also stimulating demand for that sector, whether that means working with local government to embed space data in the delivery of public services, or by having identified a strength that their regional space sector could exploit, then work with adjacent sectors to offer where the space sector may be able to offer value and open up a new market they could then exploit. And the ambition is that these network of space clusters, all representing local space sectors, addressing growth barriers to their local space sectors, then network together into a really vibrant ecosystem. So wherever you are in the country, you understand what partners are available to you locally, but also the breadth of what the UK has to offer. And if you need a particular type of infrastructure, or you've got a particular project in mind and you need a certain type of partner to deliver that, you can use the clusters as a sort of catalogue or brochure to go elsewhere, find out what else is going on in the UK, and then make those partnerships. So one particular thing that clusters, the more mature clusters, are doing at the moment is running very specific projects focused on the local space sector to overcome a very specific barrier to growth. And one of those is based down in Space South Central, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a bit. So rather than talking about that, I'll focus on the others for now. But for example, in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, a couple of issues were identified that were holding back that sector that's got a lot of capability, but stopping it growing at the moment. And those were lack of demand for the data that they're able to analyze over there, and lack of access to a big prime organization who could support the regional supply chain. So we're running projects that address both of those issues, both based in Northern Ireland. One of which is called the Space Technology Exploitation Programme, and that is awarding R&D funding to SMEs who are able to partner with a prime or a large organisation specifically to address one of their technology requirements in the future. So by doing that, the company is able to build a relationship with a potential future customer, but also access funding in order to develop a product that customer could then buy. So over the period of the project, they can develop this technology, they can build relationships, and it would hopefully lead to a more sustainable market and supply chain in the future. And likewise, we're also working with Northern Irish government to create an open access Earth observation portal that the public sector could use to embed that data into service delivery, whether that means improving the transport network or local sort of erosion monitoring. Anything that Earth observation data can be used for will provide guidance on how the government can draw on that data. So not only is that improving life on the ground for people living in Northern Ireland, it's also stimulating demand for space sector services. And we take a similar approach to that across the whole country, where not only are we strengthening the space sector by addressing barriers that they're facing, we're also stimulating local economic growth and improving life for the people based in these regions. But that's the focus of what my team does, generate supporting space clusters. I also mentioned that businesses and infrastructure and universities are equally important parts of the ecosystem. So if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, please, Heather. To support businesses, the UK Space Agency runs our Accelerator programme, and you can see there we've got 3 different streams focused on businesses of 3 different sizes and 3 different TRLs. We've got one on the far left, the Explore stream. That's specifically on brand new startups, either space professionals that have an idea and want to grow it and need that addition, sort of early stage business advice, or people that are just coming into the space sector and need to learn more about how our sector operates in order to grow a brand new business. And then as their company grows and they start to generate revenue and start to prototype, we have a separate stream called Leo. And then once they've got their customer base, once they are generating revenue and need to scale, we've got a separate program for them called Geo. So yeah, pleased. New cohorts are welcome every year. We've got one at the moment, and I think later this year, around November time, we'll be opening up again. Previously, we've supported 80 companies through the program, and I think the program itself, we invest about £1 million to 1.5 million every year, and that's generated £80 million back for the companies as part of it through new investment and new revenue. So it's a really successful program, and please do promote it to your networks when the next cohort applications are open. And my final slide, please, Heather, is focused on infrastructure. So that's the last thing that our team is focused on. This is a brand new fund called the Space Cluster Infrastructure Fund, and it is worth £50 million, so 50 million investment into UK infrastructure across the country. But the reason that the cluster is in there rather than it just being a raw infrastructure fund is because the way we are going to mark applications is how important the infrastructure will be to anchoring what the regional space sector requires, what infrastructure will generate the most amount of inward investment back into that region, and will enable the companies in there or company to grow. So the applications for that just closed. We're now looking at which infrastructure bids we'll be taking forward, and importantly, it's also a way to help spread investment across the whole of the UK. So over half of all the investment that we make in infrastructure, 55%, will be outside of London and the Greater South East, so that we are stimulating the whole of what the UK has to offer in space, including Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and all of England. Yeah, happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll pause there and I'll hand over to Dr. William Lovegrove, who can talk more about Space South Central, which is one of the UK's leading space clusters.
We can collect questions in the chat, and we can ask them at the end of the presentation of Dr. Lovegrove. So don't hesitate to ask any questions, any curiosity to our speakers. So use the chat. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this invitation and opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to apologize now because in the last 24 hours, I've developed a throat cough. So if you do have headphones and I cough in your ear, I am so sorry about that. But it doesn't matter. You know, the miracle of video conferencing does allow me to attend and present the Space South Central here, even though I'm not particularly well at the moment. Also, my voice is a number of decibels lower than it probably should be too. Heather, could you skip on 2 slides, please? Thank you. Great. I thought I'd just introduce Space South Central. You saw it perfectly positioned on the map there. Here's a little sort of expanded map of where it is. It encompasses Hampshire, the counties of Hampshire and Surrey. And in actual fact, Space South Central, the cluster, was created from 2 smaller clusters. So we went through a cluster merging process, about 18 months ago to reform. And those clusters were the Surrey Space Cluster, centered around Guildford and the University of Surrey, and then the South Coast Centre for Excellence in Satellite Applications, centered around the University of Portsmouth. It's a great cluster. There's about 20% of total income, for the UK space economy based in this area. It's got a very, very strong industrial space heritage, and 3 universities, which is one of our distinct features. There's some statistics there on the right-hand side: 125 space organizations, 3 billion total income, 1.6 billion export revenue, 65 million in foreign direct investment, almost 6,000 people in terms of being employed in the region, and 55 companies founded since 2010. It's a really healthy cluster in that respect. It has primes, it has mediums, it has smalls, it has startups, all of the attributes of a very, very healthy cluster. The cluster is anchored around 3 universities. That's the University of Portsmouth, Southampton, and Surrey. Heather, if I could ask you to move the next slide on. And in fact, these universities, firstly, it's interesting and unique that we have 3 universities in the cluster. Typically, other clusters have 1 leading university. We have 3. And when we sat down with our colleagues from Southampton and University of Portsmouth, we realized that our skills and our academic endeavor perfectly complemented each other. I won't go through these bullet points here, but I put them online there to sort of evidence the strength and the depth of these universities. Different sizes, different shapes, different experiences, but they've come together very, very well to form the academic anchor of the cluster. Heather, next slide, please. So the theme here is catalyzing investment, and in fact, the Space Agency has really helped catalyze activity in our cluster through its targeted calls for funding. You can see here that, in fact, in reference to what John said, we recently won some funding to support the cluster development. So that's our enterprise network, and the second one down there on the top left-hand side, almost £500,000 to launch a dedicated program called Spacecraft. And Spacecraft is aimed at SMEs, which has been a recurring theme, I think, in the presentations that you've heard. about giving them access to facilities. So giving them access through a structured program to the facilities in the Surrey Space Centre and other facilities as well from the other universities in a structured way, so that those young companies can call on those facilities as required in order to develop their business plan. And that's what that piece of funding has enabled, which then has knock-on, trickle-down effects. John mentioned as well the Space Cluster Infrastructure Fund. We've submitted a couple of bids into that as well for strategic pieces of infrastructure that we felt were missing, not only in the cluster, but also nationally. And we arrived at those conclusions through dialogue with industry. And that's a really strong advantage of the cluster as well. It gives us an immediate access to unparalleled dialogue with industry, the industry partners who are in our working groups and around the cluster table as well, to very, very quickly respond and say, well, what do we need? Do we need radiation equipment, drop towers, or in Portsmouth's case, they've got a very good proposal for space missions incubator, which knits everything together and allows missions to be designed and incubated rapidly. The advisory board, you can see there as well, the composition of it includes civic authorities, the county councils, as well as the universities, as well as trade associations, as well as key members from industry as well. It's a very well balanced board. And the phrase that I like to use is that when it comes to a cluster, we need the cluster to be healthy and we need the cluster to be vibrant and growing, but we do not need to control the cluster. That is not what you're looking at with an advisory board. We're there to steer, signpost, connect, enable, keep an eye out for funding opportunities to strengthen the cluster nationally and internationally as well. But this is not a controlling entity. This is a nurturing entity. Next slide, please, Heather. So a little bit more on our missions, which dovetail well into the words that you heard previously from John and from Heather. Our primary goal here is economic growth and international collaboration, leveraging of strong innovation and end-to-end space missions capability. Innovation comes through quite strongly. It's part of the university's core missions. We are very interested in providing support for startups. Again, that's related to the university's mission. I think universities do have good track record, certainly Southampton, Portsmouth and Surrey do, in terms of nurturing startup innovation culture as well, providing structured programs. It led to the design and the conception of the spacecraft program, allowing our facilities to be opened up for a SME business plan development. I think that's a real value add of what higher education institutes can do. And also the final point there, address major skills shortfall. And I'll come to that in a second. The supply chain tier, the pie chart, the exploded pie chart you can see there. I won't go into detail and apologize for the small typeface, but in this cluster, broadly speaking, we cover all of the major areas of the space sector except for launch. And what that means is that we can call on conception, design, testing, satellite creation, the full gamut, all the way up. The only thing that we don't have in our particular cluster is launch capability. Heather, next slide, please. So I mentioned skills. There is a skills shortage in our cluster. We recently hosted the Science Minister, George Freeman, and there was a real focus on skills. Of course, that is a very healthy thing. Although it's a problem, it's a healthy problem. It shows that there's economic growth, a shortage of key people. So we're very focused on that, and it's probably one of our primary mission goals. Yes, we have universities, higher education institutes as well, 70,000 combined undergraduate students enrolled annually on space-related courses. We also have the further education, and the cluster does reach out and engage with further education, the colleges in particular, the apprenticeships. We're very, very interested in that. And then beyond that, into secondary education as well. We have outreach programs, which we're very interested in making sure that young minds are aware of the careers and the career options in this part of the country that can take them forward into roles and jobs that they may not have previously been aware of. Continued professional development is an attribute as well that is available. We deploy that through the universities. And skills remains a focus because we know that jobs are being created inside the cluster, and our cluster industrial partners are telling us where they need those jobs being filled, the skills gap. Have the next slide, please. So I'm going to dwell a little bit as well on the international context. In fact, that's my responsibility within the cluster. I sit on the cluster advisory board, and my specific remit, apart from representing the University of Surrey, is also to raise the profile of the cluster internationally. Next slide, please. And I want to just highlight an example here that I was personally involved in over the last 6 months, but it really brings together several agencies of government and the cluster as well. And in this particular focus, the focus was on Singapore, where we took an idea to a fully supported international bid that went into the UK Space Agency's bilateral international bid process very, very recently. And we did that in 6 months, almost from a standing start. And the only way we could have done that was through coordinated support, not just from the Space Agency, but also from DBT and also from the British High Commission in Singapore. We had various agencies working very, very closely, a trade mission involved as well, number of conferences, and our delegation was able to access and leverage those networks very, very successfully over a 4-month period to form real working relationships with the leading academics in the field of space from 3 universities in Singapore and their space agency, Austin, as well. And that culminated in a very mature bid being put forward, again, on an accelerated basis earlier this year. And it'll be very interesting to see. We're expecting the results of that to be announced very, very shortly, and we're very confident about that. But I think the point I'm highlighting here is that it's stronger. It's a stronger bid and a stronger proposition when we collaborate together as universities, collaborate together as industry, and we collaborate together with various different arms of government. That concludes my presentation. So I hope that was useful and interesting and stimulated some questions.
Thank you very much to Heather, John, and William. It was very interesting and very much insightful. Now we open the floor for questions. We have already 2 questions in the chat, so we can start from those. We have Thomas Geist, who actually addressed a question to John. He asked what kind of infrastructure can be funded via the SSCIF, perhaps. Maybe you missed that, so if you can touch upon this again. And if it is also possible to buy resources from existing infrastructure.
Yes, no, it's a really good question. And I was just about to drop some links that have more information in the chat. But very briefly, the infrastructure that SCIF is focused on is on commercializing existing products and services and getting them market ready so that they can be sold without looking at any particular type of technology. So it's more focused on the TRL level of what it will be supporting. On the buying resources point, that will vary from infrastructure provider. Some are open access, some are available on a commercial basis, and some are for exclusive use of the companies or universities that own them. So that would be a very specific question, and if there's anything we can do to facilitate engagement on something specific, let us know. But it's not a general answer for that one. And I'll drop the links in the chat.
Thank you very much, John. I have another question that actually it's for all of you from John Burley. And John asked if UKSA Catapult have well-proven frameworks to support startups, gain funding and scale. Several presentations spoke to the key financial ratios, revenues, and etc. What support does UKSA have to support UK companies in reaching net zero CO2 and improve their wider sustainability? He also adds that it's not easy for new businesses to make the right decisions that have a positive life cycle benefit to their environmental impact, and some central leadership and expertise would be useful in this area, or maybe it exists already. So it's a very interesting question and very on point, actually.
I don't mind kicking off on that. So we have, with the BAS programme, which I mentioned, we have a permanently open call which funds any use of applications at all. So obviously that can include sustainability focused things, but doesn't have to. But we also offer themed calls. So these are timed calls that often are competitive, but can be open as well. And those are quite regularly sustainability focused. It recognises that because the themed calls are agreed across European member states, net zero in the UK and across Europe is a big focus. The green transition is something that we share as a priority across all those countries, and therefore many of the themed calls that come out are asking about, you know, maritime for sustainability or textiles industry for sustainability. They tend to have that sustainability tag on them to promote the net zero focus. And actually, even through the open call, I think a lot of funding we provide is for green solutions to various issues, as it's becoming more and more apparent that companies need to start moving in that direction, and investors are looking for those kinds of things as well. There is other funding in the agency as well for Earth observation, but I'm less close to that. But a lot of the Earth observation applications tend to be climate focused too.
I can also add to that in that from a cluster perspective, it's sustainability is a priority for a number of them, but particularly up in Scotland, there's a huge amount of activity working with companies and universities based there to decarbonise and move towards net zero. They've got as far as we're aware, the world's first space sector specific sustainability roadmap. And we're working with them on a specific project that's looking to carbon audit a number of the companies based up there to understand exactly what their environmental impact is at the moment and steps they can take to reduce it, with a view to the sector becoming the most sustainable space sector in the whole world and carving that out as a unique growth and market opportunity.
I don't know if also William wants to add something on this, or not really.
No, I was focusing on Tina's question, which you might
Yes.
come to, which was the international question.
Exactly. And that was the third question that we have from Tina Jagger. I hope I pronounced correctly. If there are opportunities for international company that wanted to engage within the programs that you presented. So this, I think it's really very relevant, and it's partially probably also connected to the following question. But please, William.
Well, it's a great question, and of course, when I travel and I speak to companies and I advocate the cluster, I meet young companies, and they do want to come into the UK and the European market, particularly from Asia and other activities as well. So I'm going to answer this in a roundabout way. We'll come back to the programs, but just as a general point, I think universities are fantastic landing pads for young companies coming in internationally. I mean, firstly, research-intensive universities are, by their definition, comprised of international people, researchers, students, etc. They're young, they're vibrant areas. Certainly at the University of Surrey, we have a research park, and we have facilities where we can host companies of any particular size, one-person hot desk, 2 desks, small offices, all the way up to larger installations as well. And of course, we're in the cluster. And the cluster can provide networking events, access to industry, access supply chain, and advisors who understand those funding program landscapes. So I advocate when I travel overseas that companies, when they're thinking about inward input, they don't term it inward investment, but when they're thinking about expanding their opportunities into new markets, such as the United Kingdom or Europe, come and think about homing your business at a university that is skilled and experienced in supporting growth, accessing funding, has an international backdrop, has a buzz, has exciting programs as well, more to offer, make you feel more friendly or more welcome than if you were to try and do it outside of that ecosystem. There are limitations. For example, our incubator at the University of Surrey is funded by UK Research and Innovation Funding. So effectively, we can offer subsidised places to UK companies because of that funding stream. And we can't offer those subsidised places to international companies. So effectively, there's a pricing differential. Now, that's quite easy and straightforward to work out, but it's an example of where UK taxpayers' money can be used, and it comes with certain constraints, and it comes with certain things you can and cannot do. So we need to navigate around those and develop different sort of approaches and propositions to make it attractive. But fundamentally, I do also believe that the government is encouraging us to collaborate internationally. And in fact, collaborate, the strongest bids being put forward are always those bids where there is a strong element of collaboration, either internally or internationally as well. So we want these companies, these exciting companies in our ecosystem. We want to partner with them on bids. We want to, with other companies as well. And we want them hiring people and creating jobs and forming their HQ and their bases inside our clusters as well. So very long answer there, but it sort of indicates, for certain companies of certain sizes, universities, again, have a key role to play in welcoming these organizations into our clusters, into our country, into our economy.
I'll just add a bit there on UKSA specific programmes. And so, yes, it's true that to apply to the BAS programme, your main applicant needs to be a UK company, but we encourage collaboration between companies and consortiums. So there's nothing to say that you can't have a partner who is from a different country and they are working together to provide that service or apply for that funding. So we encourage that and acknowledge, sometimes there are skills that are necessary for certain ideas to become materialized and to be delivered that require support from, companies that aren't in the UK, or the types of companies that aren't in the UK. And so we're happy to support that. There's also a fund in the UK that my team doesn't run, but is run out of our directorate, which is called the International Bilateral Fund. That is a fund that is looking to set up relationships jointly with other international space agencies, and where there might be other space agencies on this call. So that's something that they look to fund. And the only other thing I'd say is we're looking to sell services abroad by supporting those UK companies to go abroad as well and forge relationships that way. So we like to think that we're offering those opportunities for international companies to come in, as well as just supporting UK. But that focus on UK growth is necessary too.
And just to add a tiny bit to that as well, and echo everything that Will and Heather said. Across government, there's a huge amount of support. I know there are representatives of the Department for Business and Trade on this call who exist to support international companies understand what the UK has to offer and where they should look to grow in the UK if they did want to come over here. But I also wanted to share a product that was launched earlier this week, developed by our partner, the Satellite Applications Catapult, with the support of DBT and the UK Space Agency. And this is a good example of the role that clusters play in international collaboration. This investor launchpad, which I've just shared in the chat, is a series of 6 documents that outline what the UK capability, what the UK offers in capability across 6 important growth areas, from areas like science to space flight to space manufacturing. But it also outlines where in the UK and in what cluster that capability resides. So if you are looking to move into the UK, you can understand where the skills and capabilities you need are located, and what clusters you should be talking to as a sort of an early first port of call, as a possible location for you to enter into the UK. So do take a look at that.
Thank you everyone for the answer. I have a question related to skills that is connected actually to probably the final question of this Q&A, which is the question of Gavin. So I'll start from mine. You just answered the question from Tina about international cooperation opportunities, for international companies. What about universities with regards to skills? So the exchange of skills with foreign university, is it something that it's doable? And if so, how university can get in touch with you? And then we'll move to the question of Gavin. Thank you.
Yes, I think universities have very good networks of between themselves internationally. So at the University of Surrey, I'm part of a network called CSER. I don't know if that's not people are aware of that, but that's an international network. There's several networks. Universities need no excuse to form networks between themselves and talk to each other about subjects that they feel passionate about. And as a result, we have those good skills and connectivities as well. So I think we're very well positioned to be able to identify where we can find skills and skills activities and design courses. And we have also very well established visitor programs, visiting academics. So again, university academics don't need too much motivation to come and visit another institution. In fact, we encourage that as part of the academic identity, the academic process of knowledge diffusion and transfer. So I think we've got, again, those international networks to offer as well. I like Gavin's question as well. Do you mind if I just roll into that? Because
yes, exactly, because he's asking what is being done to ensure that individuals in the sector are trained with effective, proven project management strategies to enable greater project success rates.
Yeah, so I think in the presentation that you heard from me, you heard phrases like anchor institution, universities being an anchor institution. And certainly in my slides, I evidenced and emphasized skills. And then I mentioned that this was something that George Freeman had particularly highlighted to us as well. And so as an anchor institution and an educational institution, the skills responsibility does feel like it's sitting on the shoulders of universities. And when we looked out and we did the survey and we did the work around skill shortage, what we saw was a lot of skills, capability and infrastructure, but it lacks a sort of cohesive, united brand or effect, something effectively marketing, effectively something that unites it together. The discussion direction at Space South Central at the moment is about creating a space skills academy. And that might have a physical footprint. It might be on our research park, one of our research parks. It might involve civic authority, support from our county councils as well. And it might be a place there where we unite classroom-based online education, CPDs, other activities with hands-on practical activities in our laboratories and our physical spaces through the spacecraft program as well. So we're actively looking at that, and I think it needs that. Again, coming back to that point I made about the cluster, we need the cluster to be healthy and successful. We don't need to control it, but sometimes we can see where an intervention which would clearly make it very clear and obvious how to upskill. And when I say upskill as well, there are lots of very, very skilled workers inside the Space South Central region who are not working in space, obviously, but there is a transition piece. So can you be a project manager in another discipline, but transition in? Can you move laterally? So there are very different types of skills and skills programs and supply chains. If you're an electronic component firm, but you've never worked in space, but you're looking for a new market to enter, what do you need to know in order to develop electronic components for the space industry? And who do you speak to at Airbus? Who do you speak to at Surrey Satellites? We can answer those kind of questions very easily through our engagement programs.
And just to build on that, I think there's nothing worse than seeing an application that's a brilliant idea, but they just don't have or they haven't demonstrated the ability to really plan the project in a viable way that we need in order to provide that funding. And one of the ways we combat that, at least on the applications side, is we have a network of what we call our BAS ambassadors. So they're actually ESA employees that the UK has funded to work around the UK. There's 4, I think, across the regions. There's one in the Midlands, one in the South West, one in London and South East. and one in Scotland and Northern Ireland. They've been the one also covers north of England. And their job is essentially, one, to advertise our programme and to make sure that people are aware that applications of space are beneficial to other sectors, but also to support people who have identified BAS funding and decided that they want to apply, and they support the applications right through to the full proposals stage. So they indicate what our panelists are looking for. They provide advice as to, you know, what could be adapted in the applications. And although they can't write any of the sections, they can be really quite hands-on with supporting those. So we found those ambassadors really helpful in upping the number of successful applicants we have to our programme.
Thank you very much, both. We have a very, very final point from Salvatore Savastano. If it will be helpful for the company knowing the FUSE program proposed by the three university created for the recent EPRCSC call to create CDT. Is this already part of the Space South Central?
Yeah. So at our last Space South Central event, which was held at the University of Southampton a few weeks ago, the academic leaders of that CDT bid came and presented to an audience of industry partners as well and explained it. So of course you don't need a space cluster in order to apply for a centre for doctoral training from the EPSRC. This happens all of the time in many disciplines. But what the cluster does is it just makes it faster to engage with industry. It made it faster to engage with academics as well. It as a cluster kind of accelerates what you need to do in order to put forward strong, strengthening bids. So it's very much in scope of Space South Central in terms of we support anybody who bids or designs programs or activities within our community that will enrich and enhance that cluster. Does that answer the question? I think there was a question about knowing the FUSE program. Yeah, so I think the cluster would say yes. It's, you know, we're there to help market and promote activities like that with the support of the academics behind it. So we have to make sure that that's what they want to do, and if they do, then we have speaking slots and programs and newsletters and emails and events that we can do to help them.
Great. Thank you very much, William. Heather was mentioning the BAS ambassador, and I see that Grant and Chris from UKSA, they both, interact with you on the chat. So feel free probably to have a look at the list of BAS ambassador in the link that Chris Hall just shared in the chat. I think we are actually reached our time limit. So I would like to thank you once again. The speakers for today was very interesting and insightful. And I hope actually for the participants that this was very useful also for you. And I think you will be happy to get in touch with some of the participants of today. For those who joined our webinar, during the webinar itself, we will be preparing a short article summarizing the main points and takeaways of this webinar, and we'll be make public as well the recording of this session. I thank you everyone once again, and I wish you all a good rest of your day and good weekend. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Alessandra. Enjoyed
Thank
it.
you very
Hope it was
much,
helpful.
William. Thank you. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.